Let's talk about Alpine. I'm not talking about the car manufacturer. Well, I am actually, but really I'm talking about Renault, their parent company, who operate in Formula One, but are actually looking to get engines from Mercedes. If you're confused, it's with very good reason, because I am too. Renault have been in Formula One since 1977 in one way or another. Their works involvement has stopped numerous times over that period, but they've been a regular name when it comes to engine manufacturing. And this is where I want to start, with the engine. We'll get into the Alpine team itself and the failings soon enough, but how did the Renault engine fall so far from grace? The works Renault team were a powerhouse in the early 2000s, taking the Constructors and Drivers' Championship in back-to-back seasons in 2005-2006. A certain Fernando Alonso was driving for the team back then. With over 400 starts, 35 wins, and 51 pole positions, you'd say Renault were a successful works team. At least they were, and that's the important point. Outside of being a works team, they of course supplied engines to other teams, and this is arguably where their biggest successes came from. 11 Drivers' Championships, 12 Constructors' Championships, and 169 race victories, powered by Renault engines. They have powered Ligier, Tyrrell, Williams, Benetton, Red Bull, Lotus, Caterham, Toro Rosso, McLaren, and of course Alpine, which is their brand anyway. Their biggest success being an engine supplier is undoubtedly with Red Bull. Renault powered Red Bull Racing from 2007 to 2015, and I'm sure you'll be familiar with the Red Bull dominance from 2010 to 2013. So why am I telling you these facts about the engine? Well, despite the success Renault has had over the years, their engine is now actually the weakest part of their car. And their current Formula One engine is one that Renault themselves keep insisting is down on power compared to the competitors. More than that though, there's now rumblings, and these have now been substantiated within the team, that Renault are seriously considering abandoning their current engine project entirely. This project is currently developing an engine for the 2026 engine regulations, much like every other team. That would mean though that Alpine, but for all intents and purposes Renault, would be without an engine for the new regulations. They would then have to source one from a competitor. That competitor is likely going to be Mercedes, especially considering that Aston Martin, one of Mercedes' customer teams, is going to Honda in 2026. That frees up some space. This, though, isn't like a team like McLaren taking a Mercedes engine. McLaren, while being very well known as a car manufacturer, are not the size of Renault, Mercedes or Ferrari. Over the years, McLaren have used other manufacturers' engines in their road cars, most notably Mercedes. McLaren do have a partnership with Ricardo plc to manufacture the engines that they design in-house themselves. But they don't have their own facility. My point here is that McLaren, for instance, just using them as an example, don't have a manufacturing facility for their own road engines. So it's pretty understandable that for Formula One, they're a customer team, and might I say, they're doing particularly well this season. And while Red Bull have partnered with Ford to make their own engine, it's just far more shocking that a genuine out-and-out manufacturer, especially the size of Renault, who produce engines on a large scale, not just for Formula One, but for road use as well, either think they can't produce a competitive engine, or simply don't think it's cost-effective to even try. Neither of those outcomes are a good look for Formula One. But let's talk about the team itself. Alpine have just announced that Oliver Oakes is going to be taking over as the new team principal, replacing Bruno Famin, who's going to focus on the motorsport-related side of the team for the Renault group. He himself had only been in the role for the past 12 months, having taken over from Otmar Safnauer, who was, it has to be said, a bit of a disaster in the role. Let's not talk about the whole Oscar Piastri situation. Bruno Famin had to deny that he had butted heads with one of the newest members of the team, who also happens to be one of the older members, Flavio Briatore. But he did admit that they both have a different way of doing things. He said, "There are two things mainly. The first one is, for several weeks we've had Flavio Briatore as executive advisor to the CEO. He has his own way and his own goal, everything. In the few weeks I've worked with him, I haven't got any major problems, any problem at all even. But I don't think we have really the same approach. and it will be clearer for everybody internally and externally if we clarify the governance of the team. Just bringing Briatore back in the first place is an utterly bizarre decision to me, given he was in charge of the team during arguably their most embarrassing moment in Formula One, the fixing scandal in Singapore. But what about Oliver Oakes? Well, he was once part of the Red Bull Junior Drivers Programme, having competed in karting and single seating in the early 2000s. But he is known for founding the high-tech Grand Prix racing team, which competes in Formula 3 and Formula 2. He takes over the Alpine team after the summer break, and at 36, it makes him the second youngest team principal. Alpine have also had so many personnel departing the team, almost as though it was a sinking ship. Esteban Ocon, of course, will leave the team at the end of the season after a 5-year relationship. When his departure was announced, there wasn't anywhere confirmed that he was going to be driving. Since then, it has now been announced that he will drive for Hadz in 2025 alongside Oliver Bearman. Esteban, he was pretty clear when speaking after leaving about what is going on at Alpine. He said, "I think on my side, on Fernando's side, on Pierre's side, on Daniel's side, we said a lot of things on the car development, and unfortunately at some stage there's been a loop missing. We were giving the feedback, but didn't really have the feedback coming back to us and the confirmation. Sometimes we haven't been listened to the way we should have been, I would say. We are carrying some issues that we still had a couple of years ago. We've improved a lot of things, but you can't be waiting years and years to be able to fix some problems, and that's what's happened." I think what Ocon has said pretty much sums up what's going on at Alpine. It feels like they're a little bit lost at sea. They're working on the engine for 2026, but ultimately this engine that they've got for this generation is supposedly underpowered. It feels like they're a bit rudderless, and they don't entirely know what direction to go or how to extract that performance. They've improved this year. They've actually got a lot better. The car at the beginning of the season was, maybe I shouldn't use the word atrocious, but it certainly wasn't where it needed to be. But clearly they're not really listening to the drivers. And now they might go from a works team to a customer team, despite being an engine manufacturer. And if they choose to stay in Formula One, I think that would be quite embarrassing. It's a shame to hear that they're not going to be making their own engines in 2026. That's the likely scenario now. It's especially embarrassing for Formula One considering they changed the regulations to hopefully entice more manufacturers to join the sport. And they did that with Audi, only to lose Renault. Go figure.